Imagine being the laughingstock of your unit, carrying a toy rifle, only to become the single man who could stop an invisible enemy that was systematically slaughtering your comrades. This is the forgotten story of John George and the rifle that rewrote military history. On the hellish island of Guadalcanal in early 1943, American soldiers were dying not from grand battles, but from an unseen terror. Japanese snipers, masters of the jungle and silent killers, were picking off men from the 132nd Infantry Regiment with chilling precision. 14 men fell in just 72 hours in the dense groves west of Point Cruz. Morale plummeted. Commanders were desperate, losing men faster than malaria. And then there was Second Lieutenant John George. At 27, he was an Illinois state champion. Marksman, a civilian expert with a reputation for incredible accuracy at 1,000 yards. But in combat, he had 0 confirmed kills. His fellow officers openly mocked his personal weapon. He carried a Winchester Model 70, a commercial hunting rifle, fitted with a Lyman Alaskan scope and a Griffin and Howe mount. They called it his mail-order sweetheart, a toy. The armorer back at Camp Forest in Tennessee had once asked if it was for deer or Germans. George had simply said, "Japanese." It weighed 9 pounds, with the scope adding another 12 ounces. In contrast, every other man in his battalion carried a standard 9.5-pound M1 Garand, a semi-automatic rifle with no magnification. Captain Morris, his commanding officer, had scornfully ordered him to leave this sporting rifle in his tent and carry a real weapon. George carried it anyway. This was the rifle he'd saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy. Its journey to Guadalcanal was delayed, a fragile wooden crate arriving 6 weeks after George himself. While others cleaned their issued Garands, George meticulously maintained his unique Winchester. The Marines had fought fiercely since August, taking Henderson Field, but they hadn't cleared the Japanese from the coastal groves west of the Matanica River. The enemy snipers with their scoped Arasaka Type 98s knew the jungle intimately. They knew how to wait. On January 19th, a sniper killed Corporal Davis. The next day, 2 more men from L Company died on patrol. On January 21st, 3 more were lost, 1 shot through the neck from a tree his patrol had passed twice. That night, the battalion commander, grim-faced, summoned George. He needed someone who could shoot. He wanted to know if that mail-order rifle could actually hit anything. George calmly listed his credentials as state championship at 1,000 yards. In 1939, the youngest winner in Illinois history, achieving 6-inch groups at 600 yards with iron sights, and with his Lyman Alaskan scope, 5 rounds inside 4 inches at 300 yards. The commander, out of options, gave him until morning to prove it. At dawn on January 22nd, George moved into position. Crouched in the ruins of a captured Japanese bunker overlooking the coconut groves west of Point Cruz, his rifle rested. His 2.5 power scope, once derided, now became his entire world. He scanned the dense banyan trees, some towering 90 feet with 8-foot thick trunks, perfect hides for an enemy. The jungle pulsed with the calls of birds and insects, the distant rumble of artillery, but George filtered it all, focusing solely on the slightest deviation, the subtlest movement. At precisely 9:17 a.m., he saw it. A branch subtly shifted, 87 feet up in a banyan tree, 240 yards away. No wind, just a small, unnatural shift. George watched. A dark shape emerged, a man meticulously positioned in a fork where 3 branches met. A Japanese sniper, facing east, watching the trail where George's battalion moved supplies. George adjusted his scope, 2 clicks right for wind. He controlled his breathing, the Winchester's trigger glass smooth at 3.5 pounds, carefully adjusted by him before the war. He squeezed. The Winchester kicked into his shoulder. its sharp report cracking through the jungle stillness. 240 yards away, the Japanese sniper jerked violently, then fell. His body tumbled 90 feet through the branches, hitting the ground near the base of the banyan tree. George worked the bolt, ejecting the empty cartridge, chambering another round. He kept his scope on the tree, waiting. Japanese snipers always worked in pairs, a shooter and a spotter. If he'd killed the shooter, the spotter was still there. George scanned the surrounding banyans, the low magnification forcing a slow, methodical search. At 9:43, he found the second sniper. A different tree, 60 yards north of the first, this one lower, about 50 feet up. The Japanese soldier was moving down the trunk, retreating. He had heard the shot. George aimed, led the movement, fired. The second sniper fell backwards off the tree, his rifle clattering down ahead of him. 2 shots, 2 kills. George reloaded, his hands steady, his breathing controlled. This was like Camp Perry, except the targets shot back. Later that morning, at 11:21, a Japanese bullet slammed into a sandbag 6 inches from George's head, spraying dirt into his face. The shot came from the southwest, a new direction. He rolled, pressing against the bunker wall. Basic sniper doctrine was shoot and relocate, but in this dense jungle, options were limited. George inched back to his position, glassing the trees to the southwest. At 11:38, he found him. The third tree from the left, a cluster of 5 banyans, 73 feet up. The sniper had repositioned to a different branch but remained in the same tree, a fatal mistake. George put the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired. The third sniper fell without a sound. By noon, George had killed 5 Japanese snipers. Word of the mail-order rifle spread like wildfire through the battalion. Men who had mocked it now asked if they could watch him work. George refused. Spectators drew attention. Attention drew fire. The Japanese adapted after the 5th kill. They stopped moving in daylight. George spent the afternoon glassing trees and seeing nothing. At 4 p.m., he returned to headquarters. Captain Morris, the mockery gone from his voice, wanted George back at dawn. January 23rd began with heavy tropical rain, turning the jungle floor to mud, making trees invisible beyond 100 yards. George waited in the bunker. The rain stopped at 8:15 a.m. By 8:45 a.m., visibility improved enough for work. George spotted the first sniper of the day at 9:12 a.m. This one had climbed into position during the rain, using the sound to mask his movement. Smart. He had chosen a tree 290 yards out, a longer range. They were learning George's capabilities. George compensated for distance and fired. The sniper fell. But the 6th kill brought a chilling and deadly response. At 9:57 a.m., Japanese mortar began hitting the area around his bunker. They had triangulated his position based on muzzle flash or sound. The first rounds landed 40 yards short. The second salvo landed 20 yards short. The third salvo would hit his bunker. George grabbed his rifle and ran. He sprinted north along the tree line and dove into a shell crater. As the third salvo struck, the bunker he had occupied moments before disappeared in explosions and flying debris. He relocated, settling behind a fallen tree 120 yards north. The hunt had changed. Now they were hunting him back. This was a duel. At 2:23 p.m., George killed his 7th sniper. At 3:41 p.m., his 8th, this one 94 feet up a banyan. Good concealment but silhouetted against the changing sun. At 5 p.m., Captain Morris sent a runner to bring George back. 8 confirmed kills over 2 days. 12 rounds fired, 8 kills, 4 misses. Morris assigned George to continue. That night, George cleaned his Winchester and considered the mathematics. 11 Japanese snipers originally. 8 now dead, 3 remaining. These 3 would be the best, the ones who had survived the longest. And now they knew exactly what George looked like, what rifle he carried. He moved to a new position before dawn on January 24th, not the bunker, not the fallen tree, but a cluster of large rocks the Marines had used as a machine gun nest. The position offered good cover and overlapping fields of fire. He settled in, waiting for the rain to stop. At 7:43 a.m., the rain slowed to a drizzle. At 8:17 a.m., he found sniper number 9. The Japanese soldier was in a palm tree, 190 yards out, unusually low, only 40 feet up. Too obvious, too easy. George hesitated. He had killed 8 men. The remaining 3 would not make elementary mistakes. This had to be bait. George lowered his rifle and meticulously scanned the surrounding trees. If the sniper in the palm was a decoy, the real shooter would be positioned to cover him, watching for any muzzle flash. At 8:28 a.m., after 11 minutes of searching, he found the real threat. A banyan tree, 80 yards northwest of the palm, 91 feet up. The Japanese sniper was in a perfect hide, concealed by branches and vines, with a clear line of sight to George's previous position. He was waiting. George had a dilemma. If he shot the real sniper directly, the sound would reveal his actual position, and the sniper would relocate before he could cycle his bolt-action rifle. He decided to use the bait against them. He aimed at the decoy in the palm tree, adjusted for wind, and fired. The decoy sniper dropped from the palm. George immediately swung his rifle toward the banyan tree. The real sniper reacted, turning towards the sound. That slight shift, that movement, was all George needed. He put the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired before the sniper could fully turn. The 10th sniper fell. 2 shots, 2 kills. But George had revealed his position. He grabbed his rifle and ammunition and ran. 6 seconds later, at 8:34 a.m., Japanese machine gun fire raked the rocks where he had been. George dove into a drainage ditch, pressing himself into the mud. The fire lasted 17 seconds. He waited, then relocated again, this time to a shell crater 100 yards east, partially filled with rainwater. He settled in, water up to his chest, resuming his watch. 10 confirmed kills, 1 remaining. The 11th sniper would be the best, the smartest, the most experienced. He knew George's tactics, his rifle, his approximate location. Somewhere in those trees he was watching, waiting, planning. George scanned through his scope. At 9:47 a.m., he realized his mistake. The 11th sniper was not in the trees. He was on the ground, 60 yards south, moving low through the undergrowth, paralleling the tree line, crawling toward George's last known position at the rocks. George remained motionless in the water-filled crater, the Winchester shouldered, breathing controlled. But the crater rim blocked his view. He would have to rise to get a clear shot, exposing himself. The Japanese sniper stopped at 9:52 a.m., 40 yards from the rocks, studying them. George waited, patience being the primary skill of a sniper. At 9:58 a.m., the Japanese sniper began crawling forward again, 35 yards, then 30, then 25 from the rocks. He was approaching from the south side, George's escape route under machine gun fire. The sniper had watched the attack, deduced George's movement. He was hunting George the way George had hunted him. At 10:03 a.m., the sniper reached the rocks, moved into the machine gun nest, and took up a position facing east toward the drainage ditch, where George should have relocated. He was 38 yards from George's actual position, but facing the wrong way, his back exposed. An easy shot. But George hesitated again. This sniper had survived 10 days, outlived 10 comrades. He would not make a mistake. The position was too exposed. This had to be another decoy. George expanded his awareness. At 10:06 a.m., he found it. A second Japanese soldier, 70 yards northwest of the rocks, behind a fallen tree trunk. Not moving, just watching, rifle aimed at the drainage ditch. 2 men, not 1. The 11th sniper had brought support, or these were the final 2. Working together. George could not shoot both with his bolt action before they reacted. He needed a different approach. Slowly, silently, he lowered himself deeper into the water, submerging until only his eyes and the top of his head remained visible. The Winchester was pointed skyward to keep the barrel dry. He waited. At 10:13 a.m., the Japanese soldier in the rock stood up. He had seen nothing, believing George had moved farther east. He turned and signaled his partner behind the fallen tree. Both men began moving east, parallel to each other, 70 yards apart, executing a sweep, planning to flush George out. They moved past his crater. Their backs were exposed. George rose from the water, slowly, silently. Water dripped from the barrel, from his uniform, from his face. He aimed at the closer soldier, now 42 yards away. He fired. The soldier dropped. George worked the bolt, chambered another round, swung the rifle toward the second soldier who was turning, raising his rifle. George fired first. The second soldier fell. 11 shots fired over 3 days. 11 Japanese snipers dead. George had cleared the Point Cruz groves, eliminating the threat that had killed 14 Americans in 72 hours. But as George climbed out of the crater, he heard voices. Japanese voices coming from the tree line. At least 6 men moving toward the fallen soldiers. George had killed the snipers, but they had not been working alone. He dropped back into the cold, muddy water. The voices grew louder. They reached the first body, 42 yards from his crater. Then moved to the second. Urgent conversation. At 10:28 a.m., the voices began moving toward George's crater. They had found his tracks, boot prints in the mud. George had 5 rounds left in the Winchester, at least 6 Japanese soldiers. Poor odds. He heard them getting closer 30 yards, 25-20. At 10:31 a.m., a Japanese soldier appeared at the crater rim, looking down, directly at George. Their eyes met. George fired from the water. The soldier fell backward. George worked the bolt while still submerged, chambered another round, rose up. 2 more soldiers were at the crater rim. George fired, worked the bolt, fired again. Both soldiers dropped. 3 rounds left, shouting, more soldiers closing in. George climbed out of the crater on the north side, away from the approaching voices. He ran 20 yards, dropping behind a fallen tree. Japanese rifle fire cracked through the jungle. Bullets kicked up dirt. George stayed low. He saw movement. 2 soldiers advancing toward the crater, 50 yards out. He aimed at the lead soldier, fired. The soldier dropped. The second dove for cover. 2 rounds left. He heard more voices behind him. The Japanese were flanking. He was about to be surrounded. He could not win a firefight against multiple semi-automatic weapons with his bolt-action rifle. He had to break contact. George grabbed his rifle and ran north, sprinting through the undergrowth, dodging vines and branches. Japanese rifle fire followed, snapping past him. He ran for 90 seconds before diving into another dry shell crater. The voices were distant now. They had not pursued. He had 2 rounds left. His pack with stripper clips was gone. At 10:47 a.m., George began moving again, not running, but walking low, using the terrain, heading northeast toward American lines. The jungle was quiet. At 11:13 a.m., George reached the American perimeter. A Marine sentry challenged him. He identified himself and was led to Captain Morris. Morris debriefed him. 11 Japanese snipers killed over 4 days. 12 rounds fired against the snipers, 11 hits. Then a firefight with infantry, 3 more kills, using 5 rounds. Down to 2 rounds. Morris ordered him to clean his rifle and rest. The Point Cruz groves were no longer a priority. The Japanese were evacuating Guadalcanal. George returned to his tent and spent 2 hours meticulously cleaning his Winchester. George's war was far from over. Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander, recognized his unique skill and asked George to train other men. George, on condition that he could keep his Winchester, accepted. He took 40 expert marksmen and molded them into 16 two-man sniper teams, teaching them breathing, trigger squeeze, wind reading, and how to adapt to the brutal jungle. On February 1st, George led 4 teams into the field. His team alone killed 7 Japanese soldiers. The sniper section operated for 12 days, achieving 74 confirmed kills with 0 American casualties. Their success accelerated the Japanese evacuation. George, wounded in the shoulder by a Japanese rifleman, recovered and volunteered for a new, classified mission in Burma. He became part of Merrill's Marauders, a 3,000-man unit designed for long-range penetration tactics behind enemy lines. His Winchester Model 70, slightly modified for lighter weight, traveled with him through 700 miles of treacherous Burmese jungle. There, he used his rifle only 3 times. A Japanese officer at 412 yards. A machine gun position at 380 yards. A sniper who had pinned down a patrol at 290 yards. 3 shots, 3 kills. But the close-range ambush-style combat of Burma meant his precision rifle was rarely needed. George realized modern warfare was changing. Semi-automatic rifles were becoming standard. Individual marksmanship, while still vital, was being overshadowed by industrial-scale warfare. George survived Burma, but never fired his Winchester in combat again. He returned home, promoted to lieutenant colonel, a decorated veteran. He later became a respected academic and consultant on African affairs. In 1947, he wrote Shots Fired in Anger, Not for Fame, but to document the brutal realities of jungle warfare and the capabilities of small arms. This book, a classic among firearms enthusiasts and military historians, described his experiences with clinical precision, no embellishment, just facts. John George died in 2009 at 90. His Winchester Model 70, the rifle once mocked, now rests in the National Firearms Museum. Most visitors pass it by, unaware of its incredible story. But this rifle, and the man who wielded it, proved that a state champion with a mail-order scope could outshoot professionally trained military snipers, clear a deadly threat in 4 days, and fundamentally change how the American military thought about individual marksmanship and heroism. If this incredible story moved you, please hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing more forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about riflemen who proved themselves with skill and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you stateside, UK, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure John George doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.